Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop. And today I am here with Beth Tyson, a psychotherapist, childhood grief and trauma expert, and a children's book author, A Grand Family for Sullivan, and a new book that's out. What's the title?
It's called The Parenting Odyssey.
Okay, so thanks so much for being here with us today, Beth. It is crazy that we booked this because of convenience. I normally do Thursday. You couldn't do Thursday. We booked Friday, and today is 12/17, which is, I mean, in terms of our topic about talking about school shootings, it's all over the news that today was such a significant day, and we're only here serendipitously. So let's take advantage of this moment and tell us why did 12/17 turn into something?
From my understanding, and I don't have a lot of information on it because it was just shared with me in most of the world last night. But there was a threat on a social media app called TikTok that there was some kind of like call to action to have mass shootings take place across US schools today on 12/17. It is my understanding that they located the original poster of this content and they're in the process of an investigation.
What a terrifying thought. Terrifying that the beauty of the internet and then the terror of the internet all at the same time, just like crazy.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're going to dig into it's such a hard thing to parent through because the fear is real. We can't take that fear away from our kids, but we also, we're like, this is new, and what do we talk to our kids about? So should we be asking them about what they know or waiting for them to bring it up themselves? And does the age of your kid, like if they're in middle school, is the advice different than if you're in high school?
I think it's always best to approach the subject with them first. We know with social media and how much these kids talk that they probably have heard something. And so it's better to be proactive and come to them and say, I'm wondering if you've heard anything at school today about possible shootings, or is there anything upsetting that the kids are talking about at school today? And just ask them what they know. That way you can get a sense of how much information they have and what their concerns might be. If you don't talk about it with children, they tend to, sometimes kids can exaggerate stories and they might be hearing information that's actually scarier and more upsetting than what's actually taking place. So it's best that they are informed by an adult with accurate information.
And would you say anything differently about how we approach it if you have a middle school kid or versus a high school kid? And I'm going to make that distinction a lot. Should our conversations change based on the age of our kid, and even what, like, could you give us examples of language of how to bring it up?
Yeah, sure. So it definitely changes based off of the age of the child. For example, a child in elementary school, or in early elementary school, you would just want to have like a one sentence word, or a one sentence that captures what's going on. For older kids, you can give them more information. They're going to want more information. And so you really want to make sure that you're being honest with your children, because that's going to increase their trust in you and reduce their anxiety. At the same time, you don't want to overwhelm them with too much gory details and too much information that maybe they don't need and don't want. Something you can say to a child is that, sometimes when someone has a brain that is unhealthy and they are feeling very angry and overwhelmed, they can decide to hurt people. And, that's an unfortunate reality that we have to live with right now. And it's not something that happens very often, but when it does, it can be very scary and upsetting. And I'm always here to talk to you about that, reminding them that no topic is too big for you. So, saying to younger children in the middle school years, this, I want you to know that you can talk to me about anything, no matter how scary it might seem. I can handle it, and I'm here for you.
That probably works for high school also, right? Like to just that same opener.
Yeah, absolutely. They need to be reminded of that at different stages. It's not something you can just say one time when they're young and then not repeat later. You want to keep repeating that message to them as they grow and develop, that, no matter what the topic is, no matter how scary or upsetting it seems, I can handle it and I'm here for you.
Okay, so I know when something happens in the news that's scary to the parents, like there's a feverish feeling about calling each other and getting more details. Like we want more information.
Hmm.
And I imagine that's human nature to a certain degree. So our kids are doing the same thing. What did you hear? What did you hear? What did you hear?
Hmm.
Um, and at some point, can it be that too much information is really not good for their well-being? And if that's true, what do we do about it?
Absolutely. You want to try and limit the amount that they are repeatedly exposed to this information. Um, it can seem to children like it's happening more frequently than it actually is when it's being repeated over and over and over again. They might not pick up on the fact that the news is just repeating the same story over and over again. They might get confused and think this is another incident. This is another case of somebody being killed at school. Also, we have to share with our children that the school and social media, they exaggerate, at times because they're trying to keep people's attention. And I think it's a really good opportunity. We talked about silver linings earlier, but I think it's a really good opportunity to explain to your children about the dangers of media, and just that how oftentimes stories can be exaggerated and repeated over and over again because their motives are, a lot of times, is to entertain people, not to necessarily protect our mental health. And so if they're seeing this on the news all the time, reassuring them that, it's part of this process is that the media can tend to scare people unnecessarily.
Well, I mean, I would say like when I was a kid and there was a crisis in our community, we all talked about it. It was terrifying. It didn't feel like an exaggeration. It's overwhelming. But today we can hear about community after community after community. When I was a kid, we didn't have access to that. So
Right.
the sense that it's pervasive and that the fear is lurking around the corner for all of us is overwhelming.
Yeah.
And of course, that is the very terrible side effect of a 24/7 news cycle.
Right.
If I see my kid reacting to that, like they seem different than they did a week ago, and they're literally trying to just be watching this all the time, you know, do we for a high school kid, I don't have the power to turn off their technology. How do we navigate that?
Sure. I think it's important also to put things in perspective for kids. And our teens are old enough to understand statistics and the numbers and the ratios of these events. And so, for example, we have almost 100,000 public schools in the United States. And since 2013, according to NBC News, we've had 46 school shootings and 70 people killed since 2013. Um, and so when you look at that, that ratio of 100,000 schools and we've had 46 school shootings, it's not as pervasive as it seems to be. There's much bigger risks out there to our children. The number one risk for preteens and teens is accidental deaths. That's the number one cause. And then after that, we have suicide. And after that, we have cancer. So school shootings aren't even one of the top three reasons that teens and preteens or tweens are dying. So it helps to put that in perspective that you're more likely, unfortunately, you're more likely to die on your way to school than while you're in school.
Well, I want to take a step back and just say the impact is huge here. So if anybody has been involved in it or has a family member or has a
Right.
friend, like the reverberations from what that terror feels like is it's hard to not exaggerate that, right? Like it's just
Right, right.
huge.
No, and I guess exaggerate might not be like, I'm not trying to say that this is no big deal. Any loss of life is intensely disturbing and traumatic. So I don't want to minimize that at all. I just want to put it into a little bit more perspective for our teens that are feeling super overwhelmed, and it's disturbing their everyday life, to help them see that, it's just it's upsetting, disturbing, but it's not quite as frequently happening as sometimes it's portrayed, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's like I'm in the conversation about feeling like our kids are going to get kidnapped when they walk down the street. Like, because when that does happen, it carries so much fear and weight that we already live with that it's hard to set it aside. But right now, it does seem like there is a huge increase and it's in the news all the time and our kids are suffering from it. So as we try to move through this space of how do we help them, let's do the flip. What shouldn't we say to them?
Sure. So it's really important that we don't invalidate the feelings that they're having. So, being very empathetic and compassionate about how painful and scary that this can be for children and for families and adults as well. So, there's sometimes, we want to distract our children from the painful stuff, or we want to pretend that it's not happening, because it's just hard as a parent to see our children in pain and to see them afraid and scared. And it brings up a lot of emotions in ourselves when that happens. And we want to look away from it and we don't want to deal with it. So, um, out of a defense mechanism, at times we can want to invalidate their experience or their feelings and not accept what they're going through, but that won't be helpful. We really need to acknowledge their feelings and be present with the pain that they're in, and try and sit with them in that, and just reassuring them that, there are risks to being alive. We all face the fear of death someday. That's a very real um, a reality that we all have to face, that someday we all will die. And I think that helping our children through that realization, and having more open conversations about death, as we don't like to have those conversations in our culture. They tend to be ignored, but actually talking about death more often can help to reduce the anxiety. When we avoid scary topics, it increases anxiety, and everybody has a fear of death. And so if we can normalize that for our children, we're going to do them a huge service to their mental health.
God, that's so uncomfortable for me. It's like, wow, that is so big and not something we do very well in America, right? Like
No.
we were surprised every time someone dies. Like we're literally surprised.
Right.
Okay, so I I would never think to talk that way to my kid, but it's helpful to hear that. Thank you. Um, on the reality side of it, I don't know how widespread this is, but I know the last incidents that happened, there were kids who knew about it in advance or heard, kind of rumors about it and didn't go to school that day. They didn't want to go to school that day. Now, that could become a real crisis in our public school system, in our school system, right? Like where
Yeah.
kids are saying, I don't want to go to school. I'm scared at school. How do we allay those fears? And I mean, can we even really like what do we do with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes back to what we were talking a minute ago, like the existential fear of death, right? That's what's at the root of all this, is that it's hitting on a really big nerve in all of us. That reality of that we can't avoid death. So I think that trying to help them become more comfortable with that and accepting of that, and you know, avoiding things doesn't reduce fear, and we know that because exposure therapy works so well for people with phobias and people who are really struggling with anxiety and they're afraid to do things. The treatment for that is to go do the things that scare you, and in incremental levels, and with the help of a therapist. So I'm not trying to say that just go full speed. You always want the care of a therapist if you have a mental health issue, but you can reducing exposure is our natural instinct, but that's actually the opposite of what's good for our mental health. So, reassuring them that the adults in their community and at their schools are doing everything they possibly can to keep them safe. That we're more aware now than ever of these threats because of technology. I mean, look at how fast the news of today spread around the world and around our communities. So, there's comfort in knowing that these things are being reported and we are being alerted the way we should be. Reminding them that there are security measures at school. Helping to embolden their control of the situation, whether it's like with, I know they make backpacks now with like materials that can be safety objects if need be. I've heard that those exist. I haven't seen one myself, but so preparing them and giving them some ways to take back some of their control, I think will be really helpful.
That's great. And also, I wonder if it's good for you brainstorming. Like, is there someone at school you could go to, not to prevent a crisis? We'll talk about that in a minute, but really because I'm overwhelmed at this moment with anxiety. Like, kind of
Yeah.
identifying the helpers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Making sure the children know about who they can go to, whether it's a counselor or a trusted teacher, even if it's somebody from another grade or somebody else in the building, the school nurse. A lot of times children feel safe with and able to express themselves to. So I think that, yeah, making sure, like having a plan, like what can you do if you start to feel anxious? Here's some things you can do. Here are some coping skills. Research, there's all kinds of information available on coping skills for anxiety for children. So arming your children and taking their power back by giving them a plan and something that they can do when they're feeling overwhelmed.
Stephanie says she has a petition going for metal detectors in her school.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. That's not tomorrow though, right? Like, wow.
Right.
One of the schools targeted was her son's school in Wilmington, North Carolina. Well, of course, we are so hoping for everyone's safety and that somehow we get a handle on this as a nation. Right now, we're trying to give parents tools to kind of navigate this crazy new space. So if we impart one really powerful message to our kids, if they hear something, even if it's a rumor, even if it's third hand, what would you say? Like how does that conversation start with our kid, where we don't want to make them more fearful? That's not our goal. But if you get a hint of something, what do you do, and how do we bring up that conversation?
Right. It's an unfortunate reality that we have to talk to our kids about these scary topics. And I think, just letting them know that if they see or hear anything that is disturbing or upsetting, doesn't have to be necessarily about a shooting, but if it's about somebody who's threatening another student or bullying, extreme bullying, being an advocate for your peers and going and telling either a counselor or somebody you trust at school, letting you know as an adult, letting them know that you're a safe person to share that with and that you'll do whatever you can to keep them safe, and just reminding them that it is your job to keep them safe, and that's what you will do to the best of your ability.
Okay, so down that same path, I'm having my own reaction to all of this. I'm nervous when I send my kid off to school. Whatever emotions you're having as a parent, um, do we let our kids in on that? Like, hey, this is terrifying for me too, or do
Yes.
they need to see us as this rock, like, I've got your back kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, there'll be different opinions on this. My opinion is to be as honest as you can with your children, but in within reason, to make sure that you're not leaning on them for support. So you want to, I mean, in my opinion, and people will may disagree with me. I am at times vulnerable with my child because I want to show her that it's okay for you to have any emotion. Emotions are not good or bad. They are comfortable or uncomfortable. And when we can help our children understand that all emotions are accepted, then they will feel okay when they have these feelings that come up. If they never see those feelings reflected to them by their parents or the people that are close to them, and then they have these upsetting feelings, they're going to think, they can think and often do think, that something's wrong with them. And we don't, that doesn't help produce anxiety when you think something's wrong with you, or if you think you're the only one who's experiencing these feelings. So letting your children know, like, hey, I'm really nervous about this too. I'm scared, and I don't have all the answers. I don't know how this problem is going to be solved, and we don't have a solution right now. We have to really live through uncertainty, and that can be really painful. And I'm in this with you. um, and as long as you're not crying on their shoulder and becoming support for them, you always want to stay in the role of the caregiver and have your emotions intact. But in order to do that, you need somebody to talk to about your feelings, whether it's a trusted friend, finding time for self-care, going to your own therapy. You can't help a child if you're dysregulated and you're an emotional wreck. You really need to be doing the inner work and have the supports around you, in order to help your children navigate through this. So it's so important for you to be taking care of your mental health as parents.
Yeah, so hard and so important. So
Yeah.
Stephanie brings up, I think it's just a very concise way to say what just shared with us that was so helpful. It is okay to not be okay, which, thank you, Stephanie. That was great. Okay, so my next question is one of the um, tools to kind of feel like you have some control is to do something, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so, what can we encourage our kids to do? Like advocacy, what I don't have suggestions, but in this case, if our kid is sitting there and we're thinking like how can we help them? Doing something is great. What could they do?
Sure. There's many nonprofits that are for gun safety and gun reform. There's the Sandy Hook Promise that was formed as a nonprofit by the families and people of Sandy Hook Elementary School, and you can get involved with them online, obviously. But there's many others. There's the Brady Campaign. There's the Newtown Action Alliance. There's Americans for Responsible Solutions. And all of these organizations are doing great work to reduce the amount of gun violence in our communities. It's helpful to raise funds for those communities that are fighting this mission. To get active in your own community about speaking up about gun safety and gun violence, and pretty much do anything you can to get involved with that mission is going to help you feel more sense of control and take back the power.
I love the idea of local because our kids they seem to me to be so empowered to make
Mhm.
change right now. And
Yeah.
so take that energy and do something local. And it's like it's great on so many levels. One of them feeling like you're trying to make a difference.
Right. And they're also like this generation is also very socially motivated, like the activism. So they're going to want to know what you are doing as a parent
Mm,
to make
yeah.
change. And so this could be an opportunity for bonding and attachment to grow between you and your children if you can get together and do this together as advocacy for gun safety.
Wow, that is such a good idea. Like a family project.
Hmm.
We're all in this together. That's
Yeah.
great. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, and our last question is, what are the signs that would clue us into the fact that we need professional help for our teen, middle school or high school kid?
Sure. You want to look for changes in their everyday functioning. So if they're having trouble, if you're seeing major changes in their sleep routines, their eating habits, if they're having somatic complaints in their body, like they're having headaches, stomach aches, gastrointestinal complaints of any kind that are persistent. And you want to also just keep an eye out on their behavior. So if you're noticing that they're more irritable, more frustrated, they're seeming sad or down, if they're acting aggressively, if they're shutting down, you want to look for those sort of extreme behaviors. If you're noticing a shift in your child, then you want to seek some type of therapy for them to help them get this, to the sooner the better. The longer you wait, the worse it gets when it comes to mental health. So as soon as you notice that something's off, or you think they're very, very concerned about what's going on in schools today, then seek that support. And honestly, therapy is good for everybody. So it's not something that has to be only when there's a problem. Therapy can be very preventative to developing mental health problems. So it doesn't have to be. You don't have to wait until you see a problem to take action and help your kids get therapy.
And also, your pediatrician can be a good resource for like, do you have any recommendations if you don't know where to start with this?
Yes.
Stephanie has one more comment, which is because one of my scouts showed zero signs of depression at all. Not even the parents knew till it was too late. I mean, Stephanie, that is the biggest fear we all live with as parents. What other signs are there?
Right. Right. It can be really hard to tell. It's the what you need to be is starting from when they're very young, being involved in those open communications so that they will come to you if something's going on with their mental health, and just constantly trying to facilitate your relationship with them and build that trust and maintain that trust with them with your honest and open, accepting, non-judgmental, discussions that will build the trust that they will talk to you if something's going on. And they may not even know what the symptoms of depression are. They won't. They most likely won't know what the child themselves. So maybe the child didn't even know how to articulate what was going on for them. So teaching your children about the symptoms of mental health problems can be really helpful so that they can say to you, "Hey, I'm having these feelings, I think I could be depressed. They don't know that they're depressed.
Yeah, that we have so much to do in this area of getting more tools for parents so that we can do this job better.
Right.
Um, and I really always like to end on something hopeful, but I feel like here it's just hard. It's just really hard. And I love what you brought up about um, our hard relationship with death. And someone recently said to me, do you know what the biggest predictor of death is? Birth.
Right.
And we don't live that way. So this is just really rough for all of us. I mean, on so many levels, it's horrible, but also coping with it is just outside of our anything we've had to deal with before with our own family. So we are praying for everybody that we somehow get a national handle on all of this. And Beth Tyson, we really appreciate your time with us. Um, Thanks for the great advice, and hopefully 1217 is over and we move forward without
Yeah.
incident. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for having me.